Okay, welcome to another one of our webinar series. This time we're talking about Vietnam. So we're answering all your frequently asked questions about Vietnam adventure travel. And as always, we have Trish Sayre, the founder and director of BikeHike, sitting here ready to answer all of your questions and tell you about the highlights of traveling to Vietnam with BikeHike.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in.
So we're going to go through a number of your frequently asked questions, and then we have a few that have been emailed in. And then we also have a special guest today, Professor Patrick Blaine. And he recently went on a trip to Vietnam with us, taking a group of his students, actually. So Patrick's here, and he'll offer a few of his insights about travel to Vietnam as well. So welcome, Patrick.
Hi, I'm looking forward to it. Nice to hear from you, Trish and Tracy.
Thanks again for joining the call. It's always great to have another perspective. So we'll just sort of dive into the questions here. And actually, before we start diving into the questions, though, one of the most important things that we like to talk about is the history of BikeHike in Vietnam. So what kind of gives us the expertise to actually be able to talk about Vietnam? So Trish, how long has BikeHike been operating in Vietnam?
Vietnam was one of our early destinations many, many years ago, and it's been approximately 12 or 13 years that we've been doing Vietnam trips right now. And it's been one of our most popular destinations since the very beginning.
And have you seen a lot of change over that time in Vietnam, or has travel to Vietnam been fairly consistent?
I have seen change. When we first started operating trips there were not as many travelers as there are now. Vietnam is definitely becoming more of a popular destination. It is still very possible to get off the beaten track in Vietnam so that you're not encountering masses of tourism like you see in many different locations around the world. But numbers have definitely been growing throughout the years for Vietnam.
You love all the destinations that BikeHike operates, of course, but you can say a little bit about why Southeast Asia is a little bit special.
I definitely love Southeast Asia. One of the reasons I love Southeast Asia is I spent 2 years living in Thailand more than 20 years ago, and I was living with a local family in a village. I was the only foreigner on the island, and living off the land as the local people were. I was very much like a Thai at that time of my life. And for me, one of the things that I love about travel is the people. To me, it's the people that make a destination more than anything. And you have such a strong connection with the people in this region of the world: Thailand, Vietnam, Laos, Cambodia, Myanmar. They're so culturally rich. There's so many ethnic groups, and they absolutely love encountering people from the other parts of the world, especially on bicycles. So I think for me, you just get a very strong sense of culture on trips like this,
Mm-hmm.
and destinations like this.
And you can see a lot of that in the actual photo that we have up right now.
Yeah, this was a special moment actually on this trip, because as you're cycling on trips like this, you're always encountering local people, and we stop along the way all the time to interact with them and hear about their lives, and sometimes get invited into their homes.
So this was just another moment along on a BikeHike trip in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so now let's dive into the frequently asked questions when people are considering trips to Vietnam. So one of the top questions we always get asked is, what is the best time of year to travel to Vietnam?
So it depends on where in the country you're going. Our trips happen in the north part of Vietnam, starting from Hanoi and going north. There's 4 seasons that happen in the north of Vietnam, and the winter time is December to March, which is the coolest time of the year. May to August is their summer, which is hot and humid, and summer is also the rainy season, so perhaps not the best time to be there. But and then in the southern part of Vietnam, you have two main seasons, the wet and the dry. Wet is May through November, and dry is December through April. So the typhoon season happens in Vietnam throughout August and November. So that's when you're going to get the most rain throughout the country. But throughout the country, they have average temperatures in the north, maybe 80 degrees Fahrenheit and like 27 Celsius. And in the south, that was in the south. And in the north, maybe 70 degrees Fahrenheit and 21 degrees Celsius on average. They're definitely cooler as well.
Okay, so one of the next there's a great little
that's in Sapa. That's on our trekking through Sapa.
Yeah, the trek there goes through both sides of the valley. It's really an outstanding trek. There's some technical parts to it, but nothing that really gets above the high end of moderate, and it's so beautiful. You go through so many little villages on the way. It's a really fun trek.
Mm-hmm. And they're smiling, so they're showing that they're having a lot of fun. So one of the next technical questions that tops the list of frequently asked questions is where does one fly to start a trip in Vietnam, and what airlines can they use to get there?
So depending on where you're actually doing a trip, but for our trip again in the north, we would fly into Hanoi, and if you're starting from the south of Vietnam, you'd fly into Ho Chi Minh City, which is also Saigon. And there are many major carriers that fly into Vietnam. There would be Thai Airways, Cathay Pacific, Japan Airlines, Singapore Airlines, Korean Airlines. I think a couple of the North American airlines may fly in there as well with some of their partners. Each of those destinations each of those airlines will stop in their hub city. And if it's Cathay, it would be Hong Kong. If it's Seoul, or Korean Airlines, it would be Seoul, and so forth.
If you're arranging your own travel, typically you have to arrange the domestic and international parts separately. So that can take a little bit of doing. But in our case, we use Delta domestically, and Korean, who is their partner, internationally. And we had a fine experience on Korean Airlines. The service was great.
So Patrick, when you went, did you have to actually book two separate tickets? Did not Delta do a through fare for you, just with partnering with another airline?
No, at least with Delta, it was necessary to ticket separately, and the itinerary was, since they're partner airlines, the itinerary was essentially together, but the actual booking had to occur separately.
Right.
And we did that through an external agency, and got what I think was a pretty good price on that booking.
Okay, perfect.
Okay, that's good to know. Okay, so next sort of technical thing to get out of the way is whether or not people need to arrange a visa to travel to Vietnam.
So it really depends on the country that you're originating from, the country where your citizenship is from, but we'll focus on North Americans here. So Canadians and Americans do need a visa to enter Vietnam. It's possible to do a visa in advance, which we recommend, because at least by doing it in advance, you're going to get it over with quickly. You'll pass through customs, show them your visa, and you're into the country. If you don't have a lot of time, you're booking last minute, it is possible to get one last minute. We would have to get you a letter of recommendation, or your tour supplier would have to get a letter of recommendation, and then you will have to enter an additional line upon arrival after customs to enter to get your visa upon arrival.
So it's always kind of nicer to get it arranged in advance.
If you have the time, we'd highly suggest you get it in advance.
We did ours in advance, and I would highly recommend that route, especially as an individual. You might decide what you want to do, but if you're traveling with a group, it's highly recommendable to go through the Vietnamese consulate in the country that you're in, and take care of things that way. For the United States, the New York consulate of Vietnam is probably the best one to work with, and I would budget in time about a month of turnaround time just to be safe. They get your stuff back in usually about a week and a half, but I would say to budget at least 3 weeks just to be on the safe side. And the fees are very reasonable. It's somewhere around the neighborhood of $100 in visa fees, and the forms can be a little bit confusing. They're online forms, but after you fill out 20, you'll be an expert.
Perfect. Okay, so the next technical question is whether or not there are any vaccinations that one needs to get before going to Vietnam.
So we're not physicians here, so we're really not qualified to give medical advice. But what we do suggest everybody does is check with the Center for Disease Control website. They keep an updated website of the entire world and any outbreaks that do come out. And you'll be able to see what all of those are. And then you can definitely speak with your travel physician, and they'll be able to give you the advice. Maybe you may not necessarily need to make everything suggested on the website, but you can have a discussion like that with your doctor. And something, again, to keep in mind that many of those inoculations do require advanced time in advance. So maybe some of them up to a month in advance.
Yeah, even more than that, for some of them, if you look at hepatitis A and B, that's usually in a 3-shot series, and so it's good to budget sometimes 4 or 5 months before your planned departure date for some of those vaccinations that may be recommended, and it's also good to look into it ahead of time in terms of the cost, because there are definitely options, and there can be a significant cost difference between the different vaccination options. So looking at that ahead of time really saves you a lot of headaches. So I would personally recommend 4 or 5 months before departure if you can get it in, if not more. It never hurts to look into it even further ahead of time if you're planned that far ahead of time.
Yeah, it's one of those things that there's a few different things that are important to look in advance, and vaccinations is always a good one. Okay, so that brings us to another question a little bit about advanced planning. A lot of people ask how fit they need to be to travel to Vietnam, specifically with BikeHike.
So our Vietnam trips, we have 2 Vietnam trips, one being Vietnam only and one Vietnam and Cambodia. Both of them are rated as moderate on the activity level, which means approximately 4 to 5 hours of physical activity throughout the day, with lots of breaks. On the biking portion of the trip, that would generally be the harder part of the trip because it's more cardiovascular, but there's always a support vehicle following us. So if tired riders ever want to jump in, they can. They never have to carry anything on their backs because the support vehicle can do that for them. The hiking portion of the trip is the most you might have to carry on your back is a day pack, if that. Some people will not even need a day pack. And it's, again, at a very casual pace because we're interacting with local people along the way the entire way. So it's not the type of trip where you're putting your head down and just going. In fact, none of our trips are like that. And then the sea kayaking, very leisurely, 2 to 3 hours of paddling in a day.
Mm-hmm. And this is one where you might be able to offer a little bit, Patrick, in terms of you had a wide range of fitness level and whatnot on your trip. So what was your experience taking the 20 students as well as a few other adults on this trip?
Yeah, I would totally agree with that. Our age difference was between roughly 20 years old and 63 or 64 years old, with an average age somewhere around 30 or 35. And the fitness levels were kind of across the board as well. We had some very fit people and some very not fit people. Some people with better balance than others. But everyone was able to navigate the activities. With anything moderate, there may be, a hill that you have to walk up that will definitely win the weaker members of the group, or perhaps someone is not as strong a paddler as others, but in terms of the level of difficulty, it was quite manageable for everyone. That's not to say that moderate is not easy. So there are definitely some challenging bits, and there's a lot of places where if you get a variety of types of people in your group or that you're traveling with, um, the more fit people will have an opportunity to kind of do something a little bit faster or break off, slightly to maybe do that other hill or what have you. Whereas the people who are dragging a little bit more, will still be able to get through the activity. And occasionally, there'll be a time during, the halfway point where they might be able to get on a support vehicle and be a little more comfortable. But the activity levels are manageable in all three types of activity: in the biking, the hiking, and the kayaking. One thing that we found particularly good was that the guide was constantly giving us water whenever we would finish an activity or before we started. So the pace is really well managed by the guides, and the guides are also really attentive to the fact that there's not a uniform fitness or ability level within a group, and they do their best to kind of take care of people and make sure that the group as a whole is staying together and progressing well.
Excellent. That's what we like to hear. Okay, so we've kind of covered these next couple questions because they kind of, oh yeah, and here's a here's a shot of the guide while on another trip with another group, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah, Wah is absolutely spectacular. He's a very very nice guy, and really just did an amazing job with our group. Everybody really formed a close connection with him.
yeah, he really likes to go above and beyond and bend over backwards and to make sure the trip is everything everyone hopes it'll be and more. So, and you can tell he's a really happy character too because he's got a great smile on his face and the travelers are smiling too. So everyone's happy.
He's very fun-loving and playful, but he's also a very good group manager, and he really tends to anticipate people's needs rather than reacting to them, which really goes a long way if you're looking at 10 or 12 days with some every day having at least some kind of somewhat challenging physical activity. It's really nice to have him there, always kind of thinking ahead about what people are going to need and monitoring everybody's situation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and how long has Wah been doing this?
He's been doing it from the very, very beginning. He's been with us. Well, for the very first trip I was ever on, he was on my scouting trip with me.
Wow. Yeah, so he's got experience behind him.
Yes.
So that's why he's so good at what he does. And he's a local to where in Vietnam?
I don't recall where he is originally from. He lives in Hanoi, but I don't recall if he's originally from Hanoi or not.
He said he was from somewhere out in the country, but spent a really significant amount of time in Sapa. And so from that experience and from living in Hanoi, I mean he's just so familiar with the areas that the trip travels in. It's really just a great resource.
Excellent. Okay, so what are the basics a person needs to pack for a trip to Vietnam? So taking into account weather and all of the things that they would find most necessary.
So again, it really depends on the type of trip that you're doing in Vietnam, but if you're doing a multi-sport adventure, we always recommend bring mostly synthetic clothing with you, quick dry pants, shorts. It's a primarily warm climate, so pants and shorts are fine. Short sleeve shirts, long sleeve shirts. You should always have a waterproof jacket along, regardless of the season, and with a hood ideally, so a Gore-Tex jacket. Lightweight hiking shoes that you can bike and hike in are perfect for a trip like this. And some type of water sandal or footwear that will stay on your foot if you're in the water, in and out of the water, like a Keen or a Tiva is perfect for something like this. Sunscreen, bug repellent, always a must on trips like this. Those are pretty much the basics.
Mhm. Yeah, I'd say if you can pack a little bit, you want to try to avoid overpacking because there's a lot of moving around on the trips from hotels to trains to buses, etc., and boats. And so, um, in our experience anyway, my wife also went on the trip with us, and we both thought that we had really overpacked because at least for us, there were a number of opportunities to do laundry every 3 or 4 days for a very modest price. And so, kind of overpacking is not really necessary, but you want to really look for versatility in your clothing, especially with the three sports kind of concern. And so, Keen sandals, like Trish said, are absolutely ideal. You can use them in the wet and the dry. And a decent pair of, either trail running shoes or hiking, light hiking boots are sometimes good. And then the synthetics are good as well. You want to make sure, particularly for women, but also for men, to have some kind of light piece of clothing with you that you can put over yourself to go to temples and pagodas, because there are a number of them that you go into, and it's just a matter of showing respect there.
Right, yeah.
So that's important. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And another thing to note about packing in Vietnam, a lot of headquarters for a lot of the outdoor gear companies, maybe not headquarters, but a lot of the factories,
Like the manufacturing
plants are in Asia. And in Vietnam, there are definitely places that you can find good outdoor gear for sale. Now, you have to be careful because a lot of it is fake, but the guides will definitely be able to let you know what is the real deal out there. And I bought a North Face pack in Vietnam for $25.
hmm
That same North Face pack in Canada would have probably cost me $150.
Yeah.
Yeah, you'll find yourself, picking up all sorts of little odds and ends in those stores. Everything from, a wide brimmed hat because you would prefer that instead of a ball cap, or all sorts of bags and sandals and shoes. And so you really don't have to worry too much if you happen to forget some piece of equipment. Most of the things that, since all the equipment is provided, the major equipment, most of the things you would need are just clothing, and all of that is very easy to find in Vietnam, and for a very cheap price.
That's good to know. So, it's not the case everywhere, but at least in Vietnam, if you forget something that you think is critical, you can usually find it temporarily while you're there. Okay, so the next thing people are wondering about is whether or not Vietnam is cheap, and we kind of alluded to this a little bit, the fact that you can pick up some things for fairly cheap. But just in general, Trish, what can you say about the overall expense of Vietnam for outside expenses, outside of your standard trip cost?
Compared to the costs in North America, Vietnam is very economical. You can have a foot massage for an hour for $5. Meals are relatively very inexpensive, and you'll get multiple plates of food. Um, hotel prices can depend obviously on the level of hotel that you're staying in, but overall the country is definitely an economical country.
And how much do you usually say for someone to budget to spend when they are on a trip in Vietnam? Like for outside expenses?
On a trip like ours, where most of the trip is inclusive, we would tell people $300 to $500 of spending money. And so your additional expenses, again, will be your visa, which you'll get in advance, your departure taxes. Some airline tickets include departure taxes, some do not. Your tips to your local guide. any items of personal nature along the way that you want. And Vietnam is an amazing destination for shopping. There's a lot of arts and crafts. They're fantastic with the artisan, all of it, like a lot of wood products and lots of bamboo, which is wood, but just lots of beautiful art products that you can buy in Vietnam. So if you're a shopper, I would definitely suggest bringing some extra money for shopping.
Are you a shopper, Trish?
Absolutely.
What? This kind of ties. This kind of ties into our next question, which is what are the cultural highlights? But what one of your cultural highlights quite often is the things that you can shop for. So can you say a few of the things that were your favorite things that you found, or the favorite places to shop in Vietnam?
So Hanoi, I think, is wonderful to shop because there's so many shops in Hanoi that sell so many different things, from paintings to porcelain pieces of art, chopsticks and little wood products, little plates and things. Sometimes like outdoor gear, like we mentioned earlier on, lots of outdoor gear. Just beautiful pieces of art.
There's a lot of really nice lacquer.
A lot of what? Sorry, Patrick?
There's a lot of really nice lacquer work in Vietnam. If you're into the painted wood with lacquer, it's some beautiful work, and especially in Sapa, some really nice textile work that you can find.
Very much so.
We bought an enormous piece of textile work for, I think it was something in the neighborhood of $35, and
Yeah.
if you had bought something like that was imported to a U.S. store, you would have been probably in the $300 range at least.
Yeah, many people actually bring patterns with them to Vietnam and get clothing made for them while they're there, suits, dresses.
Right.
But you have to have time for that. So that would require a couple of days staying in Hanoi before the trip would start to do something like that, or afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And
Especially in Hanoi, there are all manners of things to buy. I mean, whatever your imagination can really can come up with, you can find so many things to buy there.
And so, Trish, what are some of your cultural highlights as a whole in Vietnam?
So Vietnam is very culturally rich because there are over 50 ethnic groups throughout Vietnam, which have their own languages, their own cultures, their own unique dress that they dress, and they dress like this every day, and their own customs. So for me, as I said earlier on, people is why I love traveling to different places, and especially those destinations that are very culturally rich. So you have so many opportunities to interact with the different ethnic groups throughout a trip like this. You'll encounter them on their water buffaloes, working in the rice fields. Sometimes we'll visit schools on some of our trips. We do that on many of our trips, where you'll have a chance to encounter that. Again, the cultural aspect of, the arts and crafts of the countryside, of the cities, and even just Hanoi itself and its chaos, because it's such a chaotic city in terms of there's motorbikes coming at you in every single, well, not in every direction, but on the roads, there's no lines for the traffic. So there's just motorbikes coming constantly, weaving in and out of each other. And if you have to cross the road in Hanoi, it's definitely a challenge at first, but it's an art, and eventually you'll actually probably enjoy doing it. And Patrick, you can talk a little bit about that because you have experience with that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a very Hua, the guide, explained to us on our first day in Hanoi the method for doing this, which is surprisingly simple. If you decide that you're going to cross the street, then you figure out when you're going to start, and you just put your foot on the street, and you keep moving slowly and don't stop, and people will very easily drive around you and anticipate where you're going. If you do that, you'll be fine. It's everything from cars to trucks to buses to the little scooters, which are most of the traffic. They're very good about, and the bicycles, they're very good about kind of moving around you, and so all you have to do is remain calm and cross at a slow, even pace, and you'll be just fine.
Yes, there is definitely a method to the madness.
Mhm.
So, Patrick, what would you say were some of the cultural highlights for you in Vietnam, taking the group of students that you took there, and or just for yourself? What really stood out culturally for you? Any moment?
Yeah, there, I'd say from a cultural perspective, probably the richest time for us was in Sapa. Just because things move so much slower there, and there are many fewer people, and that's when we did a lot of our more substantial biking and hiking through small villages, and so we really had a chance to one day interact with and eat inside the home of some Red Zao people, and um, and the next day we were with the Hmong people, and just in that particular corner of Vietnam, there are so many ethnic groups and languages, and they were all very open and happy to talk with us, and we learned how to say rooster in three different languages, and um, it was a it was really a nice thing to be able to, Trish mentioned going into schools. On our hike, we went into a school, and we weren't able to get into the classroom, but we were able to walk around the grounds of the school and really get a sense of what the classrooms look like, and see some of the students. But constantly throughout the trip, whether we were in Ha Long Bay or in Hanoi or wherever it was, the nature of the trip was such that we were always walking or biking or paddling, um, you know, through places rather than riding on a bus or something like that. I mean, only when we had to move from one city or region to another were we on kind of a closed motorized transportation. And the rest of the time, we just had all these really incredible experiences getting to meet people and talk to them.
So, one of the things I was wondering about, Patrick, was um, when I was speaking with you prior to recording this webinar, you had mentioned that BikeHike, there were certain reasons why you chose BikeHike and you chose Vietnam. So I'm curious if you could speak a little bit about that as to what made you actually choose to go to Vietnam on this trip and why with BikeHike.
Sure. By my area of specialty as an academic is Latin American studies, and so I've traveled around Latin America and Spain and Europe really extensively. But I'd never been to Asia before, and it presented a unique opportunity. And one of the other people going on the trip was an Asian historian who had never been to Vietnam either, and so we were really interested in that as a destination. Thailand, was a first thought, but in my opinion, at least, Thailand is kind of overdone at this point, and so we wanted to go to some places that were not kind of completely overrun and just provided a unique experience. And why BikeHike specifically is that we were looking for an agency that was able to do both outdoors activities, which I like very much, and our students really enjoy, and enjoying natural spaces and being active and actually inhabiting a space and moving through it rather than just looking at it. And But we wanted an agency that was able to do that, and the cultural portions, whether it be museums or meeting a number of different groups and getting to interact with people, sit down and have meals with them, or have tea with a family, and we wanted to find an agency that was able to integrate both of those types of experiences rather than kind of trying to do them separately or piecemeal. And BikeHike definitely did that. It looked like the company would provide that sort of service from the the materials that they provide on the website and elsewhere. Um, and that's definitely what they delivered. It was a very well integrated service, and our guide, who was excellent in moving our group through our outdoors and physical activities, was also really knowledgeable about the cultural background of the places that we were going, and really made places like the Museum of War in Hanoi, or the War Museum, you know, come alive, because he knew a great deal about the different things we were seeing. But also, if we happened to be in a pagoda, he would be able to tell us about, the Confucian origins of some of the architecture and artwork, or the representations of Buddhism there. And so, it was really kind of one-stop shopping, and met a lot of the criteria that we were looking for meaningful and substantive adventure travel. And so we were very happy with the fact that BikeHike was able to do that so well.
Yeah, that's great to hear, because that's definitely what we like to think that makes BikeHike stand out, is that it's not just a hodgepodge of activities, but it's a very integrated and very immersive, people-focused, relationship-focused experience.
Absolutely. Connecting the world through active travel. That's our slogan, and that's why.
Yeah, no, again, because, and I think you said it quite well, Patrick, as well, the fact that, just getting to some of these places was, through the mode of transit, like the kayak or the biking that you chose, that was part of the itinerary, actually became the cultural experience as well, because it wasn't just about, riding your bike there, but riding your bike there got you to meet these people along the way, or to, have Wa point out certain things along the way because you were taking that route.
Absolutely. I mean, the food was also particularly great part of the experience. There was a real, incredible variety of different types of fish and shellfish, and we had just an amazing experience through the food. And for example, when we were on the boat in Halong Bay, we had, our boat that we had to ourselves had its own chef, and the chef did some really beautiful, amazing garnishes with mangoes and tomatoes, for example, turning tomatoes into beautiful roses, or mangoes into birds. And so we got to see all of that, but he also taught us, the last day we were on the boat, how to actually make those. And so some of our people got to try their hand at taking a very large knife and turning a mango into a into a bird. But yeah, the food and in all the places we were at was outstanding, and they tended to be served family style. And for the main meals, especially the dinners, they tended to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 4 to 6 courses. The lunches on the boat were about 4 or 5 courses, and the dinners were 6 plus courses, and there was always fresh fruit, dragon fruit, mangoes, and watermelon, and other things like that for dessert. But um, you know, the food was definitely, some of the things were new and adventurous, but a lot of things were familiar. And because it was, many dishes served family style, if there was a particular thing that someone didn't want to eat, they there were many other things for them to eat and try. And in all of the restaurants and the boat when we were on that, and all those places, if someone had specific dietary requirements or allergies, they were really responsive about catering to those specific needs. really happy about that, and a lot of the strange food that we opted to eat. It was definitely not on the menu, but we opted to eat many strange things.
Yeah, so basically there was a lot of adventurous opportunities, but you could be sort of oblivious to some of the more adventurous items if you wanted to, but you could take
Yeah,
them out if you wanted to as well.
absolutely, and you know, it's just a matter of communicating with the guide about what sorts of things you might want to try if you're really into to eating things that some people find appalling.
Hmm.
You know, that will often happen in a side room or away from everyone else, and you can try to make that part of your experience. But if someone is a little more touchy with some of those things, they're not going to be put off either. Um, and even for vegetarians, for example, it was perfectly easy for someone to be a vegetarian and have plenty of good variety foods to eat there.
Because yeah, I think that's one of the things that people are a little bit nervous about traveling to somewhere like Vietnam. They're a little bit nervous about, uh, yeah, what will the food be like? Because you just always hear these sort of stories. So it's great to know that the adventurous stuff is there, but it's kind of in the background. And
And Vietnam is also an easy destination. Patrick mentioned it already, but about the vegetarian. But we have lots of travelers who have dietary restrictions from gluten-free, dairy-free, vegan, vegetarian. Vietnam is one of those destinations that's easy to accommodate any of those dietary restrictions. Some destinations are not, but Vietnam is.
how did you find Vietnam stood out from some of the other places that you have been because you have traveled extensively as it's sort of part of your work and then part of what you like to do outside of work as well, I guess. How did Vietnam
Mm.
stand out for you from other destinations you've traveled?
It was an interesting place because it's such a young country and everything is moving so fast and Vietnam is really developing so quickly, kind of in the same way that China was 30 or 40 years ago. And so getting there right now and being able to see kind of the formation of this society and how things are changing in rural and urban areas was really cool. The people were really kind in Vietnam, and at the same time that everything is moving fast and everyone is a go-getter and working very hard all the time. Um, they've also got time to sit down and kind of enjoy a green tea together or
Hmm.
tell you about their family history in the place. One of the houses we went to had been inhabited by the same kind of clan or family um, for hundreds of years, um, and they were able to tell us a bit about the history of their family in the larger context of the Vietnamese history, and that was really nice. But yeah, in general, as far as a national kind of character issue goes, the Vietnamese in my limited experience, I would say they're a little more similar to the Chinese, culturally speaking, than, for example, Cambodia or Thailand. It's if you were looking for something to compare it to, it's definitely a little bit more similar to China in that way, but definitely a much kind of younger country and exquisitely different. And I think that the diversity in Vietnam, the cultural diversity, is something that really makes it an attractive destination.
Hmm. Okay, so another thing that I just wanted to talk a little bit about, because this is something that people are always asking about, and Trish, you can explain a little bit about the different types of trips that Bike Hike offers in Vietnam and how it relates to this. But so, what can people expect in terms of where they stay, like accommodation in Vietnam?
So we, again, on a number of our different trips, we have different variations. So our bike, hike, and kayak Northern Vietnam trip is all in three-star accommodation and we do have some nights of homestays, and we have 2 nights in overnight trains. So the 3-star accommodations are boutique hotels. They're very tastefully done, beautifully decorated, and 3-star hotels in Vietnam are much higher level than they are in North America. In North America, I'd assume a 3-star hotel is more like a Super 8 or something of that sort, but they're much nicer than that in Vietnam. The homestays are very basic. You're staying in people's homes. We're guests in their homes, and every home is unique, as our homes are here. Some of those accommodations could be very, very thin mattresses on the floor. Some of them might actually just be a mat, like a straw mat on the floor. And then there would be, the family would be cooking for us on charcoal in those homes. The family always cooks a big meal for us in those homestays. The trains are 4 people per berth, and it's a sleeping train, so they're quite comfortable. Some people say they have challenges sleeping on a train. I personally love sleeping on a train; it rocks me to sleep. But they're fairly comfortable for a sleeping berth train. There's washrooms in every few carts. Then there would be our active Indochina trip, which is all in 4-star accommodation, and we designed that trip for those who need a little bit more comfort, and really they just don't want the homestays because they're a little too basic for them. And the train is upgraded to a higher class of service as well for the train.
Okay.
Yeah, their accommodations were great the whole time. We were in the 3-star range, which I would agree is more like a 4-star range in the U.S. And they're very comfortable hotels. We were in hotels the whole time, and I would say the same about the train sleeping berth. Their trains are an aging system, but the sleeping berths are very clean and well maintained, and their washroom and bathroom on the train are just a few doors down from your sleeping berth, and that's it's a perfectly fine way to spend an evening going up to Sapa and then coming back down to Hanoi. They're also air conditioned. And then on the boat, if your trip includes the junk boats, the cabins on the boats are very nice. They're 2 people to a cabin, and the cabins include a bathroom with a nice shower with a kind of a slate floor and a sink in a bathroom, or rather, a sink and a toilet. And all of the accommodations we had were unique but really nice, and especially the boat we found. We didn't at all expect how nice the cabins would be on the boat. They were really well maintained and a nice little cabin, and the dining room on the boat was very nice. The sun deck as well. It was a really nice way to travel. But even in Sapa, we really enjoyed our hotel rooms. And in Hanoi was the same thing. We were in it would have been like a European 3 or 4-star hotel, and the breakfasts at the hotels were great. So it was a nice experience in terms of the accommodations.
Excellent. Yeah, because I think that's something that people always have a lot of questions about, because especially if they haven't traveled to Asia, they are always kind of wondering what to expect in terms of accommodation. So I think your answer and Trish's explanation as well give people a lot of peace of mind. The next one that people are always sort of wondering about and planning for in advance is whether or not they should be expecting to tip the guides, whether or not it's important, and how much. So Trish, how important is this, and what do you recommend?
It is important. It's not mandatory, but we highly recommend that you tip the guides, and because they work very, very hard, and it's just customary to really be tipping them, and especially for North Americans, we're used to that. So we recommend anywhere between $8 to $10 per day for the guides, and when there is a driver for portions of the trip as well, we recommend about $5 per day. $4 to $5 per day for the driver. But there might not be a driver with you every single day throughout the trip, so it's not, you just have to add up how that would happen, or how many days the driver has been with you.
And then, and how important would you say it is to show the love to the guide through a tip? Like, how important was your guide Wa to your trip?
Yeah, our trip wouldn't have been nearly half as enjoyable, nor half as safe, nor half as really, effective if it hadn't been for our guide. It's just such an essential part of the trip, and Trisha's right. I mean, they really do bend over backwards, and for if it's 10 days, for example, that they're with you, I mean, they're basically with you from the time you wake up until the time you go to bed, which means that they're up earlier and up later than you are, and there really are just 1,000 details that they're constantly managing to keep you happy and safe, and maybe extra things that you might want to do. Wow was really wonderful about walking through, say a street in Hanoi, and finding there was a street vendor, for example, of some kind of food that was a typical Vietnamese food, and he would buy enough for everyone in the group to share some. And it's all those little details that really add up. But it's a tremendous amount of work on their part, and really it's they're going far above and beyond the basic requirements of their job duties, and so therefore I think it's just it's a nice corresponding gesture to show your appreciation through a good tip. It's how they make their living, and so it's important. With the drivers, it's important to try to talk to your guide and figure out how long drivers are going to be around for, because if they're not going to be back the next day, or you're going on a train, or you're going on a boat, you may not be able to give your tip to them the next day, and so it's sort of important to figure out how long your drivers are going to be around so that you can make sure to get them their tip before they disappear.
Mm-hmm.
Good point, Patrick.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Because the main guide is with them for the entire time, but it's just the drivers and different things that would change up based on like where they are.
It's usually the same driver throughout the trip. However, when you're on the boat, the driver's not with you, and then they'll usually come back later on. So they're in and out.
Yeah,
And same with the SAPA portion. They're not with you every single day.
But yeah, it's good to clarify like whether you're going to be seeing that one again or not if you did feel you wanted to tip them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, definitely. Okay, so the last little question that is one of the ones that we're always asked about Vietnam is just whether or not there's internet or sort of cell service in Vietnam, and what to expect in that regard.
Vietnam's really easy to get up on the internet. Most of the hotels, in fact, probably all of the hotels nowadays, will have Wi-Fi. So when you don't have to go onto your data, because you can actually pick up the Wi-Fi at the hotels. When you're at the homestays, that's not going to be possible. You won't get Wi-Fi in Halong Bay, but some people like to travel with an unlocked phone and bring a SIM card, so they could make local calls that way. But a lot of travelers will pick up data plans as well. So if they are not able to get online in some specific places, they can do that with data. But that may not be possible in Halong Bay. I don't believe there is a cell connection in Halong Bay.
Yeah, our experience at least was that there was no cell connection on the boat after you were about a mile out of port, and then coming back into port about a mile away, the cell connection picked up. But that is a little kind of dark window where you're not going to easily be able to communicate with the outside world, and that's kind of a nice thing to have that little space of relief from text messages and emails and anything else. And in Vietnam, most U.S. carriers, depending on what kind of phone you have, you'll want to check with your carrier, but depending on the phone, most U.S. carriers include Vietnam in their international plans, which will give you a lower price for cell and data use while you're there. And so you could very well be able to use your own phone the whole time without having to, buy a Vietnamese phone or a Vietnamese SIM card. It's worth checking with your carrier.
So that brings us to the end of the webinar. If there was anything that we didn't answer, it's very possible that we can still get an answer for you. But we've just sort of covered the top frequently asked questions that we are always getting emailed or asked on the phone. So hopefully this provided a little bit of insight and helped you think through the possibilities of traveling to Vietnam. And again, if you did not get your question answered in this webinar and you still have a question, you can send us an email at info@bikehike.com, or you can give us a call at
888-805-0061, or our local number is 604-731-2442. That's a Vancouver number, so if you're calling internationally, you have to add a 1.
Okay, so feel free to send an email or give us a phone call. Don't be afraid to pick up the phone. We like to answer and talk to you as well. It's nice to hear a voice sometimes instead of all the emails through the internet. And so thanks again, Patrick, for taking the time to add your perspective to some of these questions and talk a little bit about your experience traveling to Vietnam with BikeHike and your group of students.
Sure, it's been my pleasure.
Thank you so much, Patrick. You've been absolutely wonderful.
You're very welcome. Anytime.